hushed history, and I want you to find a place where you can fully relax and let the outside world fade away into the background as you get comfortable for the story I am about to share with you today. Picture yourself on a narrow boat moving through still, dark water before the sun comes up. The canal around you is completely silent. No engine. No wind. Just the soft sound of a wooden pole dipping into the water and lifting again, pushing you slowly forward through the dark. On either side of you, the canal banks are dense with reeds and low trees. And then, as you round a bend, you see it. First one, then three, then too many to count. Faces in the trees. Not moving. Not making a sound. Just hanging there in the gray morning light, staring at you from every direction. Cracked mouths, hollow eyes. Skin blistered and split from decades in the sun and rain. Some of them missing arms, some missing their heads entirely. Some just torsos impaled on stakes in the ground, reaching toward you with nothing at the end of their wrists. Hair matted and tangled in the wire that holds them in place. Rows of them nailed directly into tree trunks. Hundreds of them covering every surface of a small island that is not much bigger than a large back garden. And not one of them makes a sound. Not one of them has to. Welcome to hushed history, and I want you to find a place where you can fully relax and let the outside world fade away into the background as you get comfortable for the story I am about to share with you tonight. Because this is not a story that was invented for tourists. This is not a ghost story that somebody wrote down in a hotel lobby to sell boat trips. This is the true account of one man, one island, one drowned child, and 50 years of something that nobody who has been to that place has ever been able to fully explain. It starts long before the dolls. It starts with the water itself. The canal system that surrounds the island of the dolls is one of the oldest surviving human landscapes on the planet. The Aztec civilization, known more precisely as the Mexica people, began building it in the 14th century. They were, at that point, one of the most sophisticated engineering cultures in the world. And they had a problem that required a remarkable solution. The Valley of Mexico sits at over 7,000 feet above sea level, ringed by mountains, and at its center was a vast, shallow lake system that covered most of the valley floor. The Mexica built their capital city, Tenochtitlan, on an island in the middle of that lake. They needed to feed a city that would eventually hold hundreds of thousands of people. And they did it by building land out of water. Using layers of reeds, branches, and lake mud, they created floating platforms anchored to the lake bed. They called them chinampas. These artificial garden islands were, by any measure, a feat of agricultural engineering that the world had never seen. The roots of crops planted on the chinampas reached down through the platform and into the water below, drawing nutrients from the lake constantly. The soil never depleted. The yields were extraordinary. Connected by a network of canals that the Mexica could navigate by canoe, the Chinampa system supplied Tenochtitlan with enough food to sustain it year after year. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century and tore the Aztec Empire apart, they built a colonial city on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. That city would eventually become Mexico City, one of the largest urban centers on Earth. The Spanish drained much of the lake system to build on. Most of it is gone now. But in the south, in a borough called Xochimilco, a name that comes from the ancient Nahuatl language and means roughly where the flowers grow, the canals survived. Fed by freshwater springs for centuries, and today supplemented by treated water as the original water table has fallen, the canals of Xochimilco are the last living remnant of that Aztec world. 170 kilometers of waterways, around 5,000 chinampas still in existence. People still live on them. People still farm them. In 1987, UNESCO designated the entire area a World Heritage Site. It is a place where the past has not been erased. It has simply stayed. And on one particular chinampa in Texuillo Lake, within that system, something else has stayed too. To understand what happened on that island, you first have to understand the man who went there. Don Julián Santana Barrera was born in the Xochimilco borough in 1921. We do not have a detailed account of his early life. What we know is that by the time the 1950s arrived, he had a wife. He had a child. And then he left them. He walked away from his family and moved alone onto a small, uninhabited chinampa on Texuillo Lake. Wide. Nobody has ever been able to give a definitive answer to that question. Some say he sought solitude for spiritual reasons. That he wanted to live simply, quietly, close to the land, the way he believed a man of faith should live. Some say the community had already begun to push him out. because Julián, deeply religious and increasingly fervent in his beliefs, had begun traveling to neighboring villages and towns to preach the Christian gospel. In the 1950s in Mexico, this was not something that went over well. At that time, preaching the gospel was considered the exclusive domain of ordained Catholic priests. A layman standing up and preaching without a collar and a title behind his name was not welcomed. Julián was beaten for it. More than once. He kept preaching. He kept being beaten. And eventually, the communities around Xochimilco expelled him. He was no longer welcome in the local barrios. He had nowhere to go. So Julián Santana Barrera went to the island. And there, a man who had been rejected by the world of other people built himself a new world. He had a one-room cabin. He planted vegetables. He fished in the canals. He sold what he grew to passing boats and traders, occasionally venturing to the nearby Barrio de la Asunción when he had produced to move. He drank pulque sometimes, the traditional Mexican fermented drink made from agave sap, and then he came back to the island. It was a small life. It was a quiet life. For a while. The girl arrived without warning. There is no single definitive account of exactly how Julián came to find her. The versions differ on the edges. In some, he saw it happen, a young child swimming in the canal near the island, the current catching her, pulling her under before he could get to her. He jumped in. He could not save her. In others, he simply woke up one morning, went out to the water's edge, and she was already there, floating face down in the still canal beside his island, with no trace of how she had come to be in the water. Julián's great-nephew, Rogelio Sanchez Santana, who later became the island's guardian, has said that the girl became tangled in the water lilies that that grew thick around the edges of the chinampa. She was swimming. She got caught in the lilies. By the time Julian found her, she was already gone. What all the accounts agree on is this: there was a body. There was a child. And Julián Santana Barrera was the man who found her. He pulled her from the water. He had no way to contact anyone. He was alone on a small island in a canal system outside a city with no electricity, no telephone, no neighbors within calling distance. So he did what a deeply religious, deeply isolated man could do. He stayed with her. And then, the following day, something drifted past his island in the current. A doll, small, plastic, face down in the water. Julian assumed it had belonged to the girl. He reached in and pulled it out. He did not wash it or repair it. He hung it from a branch of one of the island's trees, dripping as it came from the canal. He did it as an act of respect. A small gesture of acknowledgement for a child who had died alone in the water beside his home. That was the first doll. That was also the last decision Julián Santana Barrera made about this entirely freely. Because after that, things changed. The nights were the worst of it at first. Julian began to hear things in the dark. The island was small. He knew every sound it made. He knew the water. He knew the wind in the raids. He knew every creak of his cabin and every sound the trees made at night. These were different sounds. Footsteps. Not heavy footsteps. Small ones. Moving across the ground outside his cabin when there was no one outside his cabin. He heard crying. Not far away. Not across the water. Close. As if someone were standing just beyond his door, weeping quietly in the dark. He heard a voice. Julian later told people that he heard the girl crying out for her doll. He reported this knot with the language of a man telling a ghost story. He reported it with the language of a man who is frightened and does not know what to do. And then one morning, he woke up and went out to check on his crops. Every single one of them was dead. He tried to understand why. He checked the soil. He checked the water. He could find no natural cause. Julián Santana Barrera, standing in the middle of his destroyed plot, came to a conclusion that was, for him, the only logical one available. The girl's spirit had done it. She was still here. She was restless. And she was not satisfied with one doll. Julián built a small altar inside his cabin. He prayed over it. The sounds continued. He added more dolls. He pulled them from the canal when they drifted past, just as he had pulled the first one. He retrieved them from the rubbish heaps on the edges of the canal banks when he went out to trade his vegetables. He traded the vegetables themselves for dolls when other people had them. He hung each one exactly as he found it. Missing an eye, hung it that way. Missing an arm, hung it that way. Decapitated. He hung the head and the body separately in different parts of the trees and left them there. He did not flinch at what they looked like. He understood what he was building, and he kept building it. The island's family of dolls grew from dozens to hundreds, then to thousands. They covered the trees. They lined the fences. They were nailed to the outer walls of his cabin. Some he dressed. He put headdresses on them, sunglasses, scarves. He propped them up inside the hut, arranging them like visitors that had come to stay. He had a favorite among them. Her name was Agustinita. She was the only doll on the island he ever gave a name to. He kept her close. She is still in the cabin today. Years passed. Julián worked. He fished the canal. He grew what he could. He searched the waterways for dolls and carried them back to the island and hung them in the trees. He became, in his own way, a kind of celebrity. Word had spread through the Xochimilco canal system that there was a man on a chinampa who had covered his entire island with hanging dolls. Curious visitors began making the journey. The trajineras would bring them the flat-bottomed wooden boats brightly painted that the people of Xochimilco have used to move through the canals for centuries. Julián welcomed them. He was, by all accounts from people who visited him, a friendly and warm host. He would take them around the island himself. He would show them the dolls, tell them about the girl, explain what he had heard and what he believed. He did not embellish. He did not perform. He spoke about it the way someone speaks about something they live with every day. Eventually, he began charging a small fee for the guided tours. It gave him another way to survive out there. The visitors started bringing dolls with them when they came, as a sign of respect for the girl, as a sign of respect for Julián. The island kept growing. Local newspaper reporters began to take notice and write about the strange man on the chinampa and his forest of dolls. Julián kept clippings of the articles. He pasted them on the walls of his cabin along with photographs. He was proud of it in his way, not because he had made something strange, but because he had made something that honored her. Here is the question that Julián's own family has never been able to answer cleanly. Did the girl exist? His relatives, the people who knew him best, who visited that island and saw him there, who watched him build that collection over decades, were divided on it. Some believed him completely. Others said Julián had simply been alone too long, that the isolation had worked on him, that he had created the girl in his mind as a way of making sense of something darker that was already happening inside him. There is no official record of a child drowning in that location. There's no name, no death certificate. No family that came forward to say their daughter had been lost in those waters. A fact that those who doubt the story point to heavily. But here is what those same people cannot account for. Julián Santana Barrera had no reason to perform. When he first began hanging dolls in the early 1950s, there were no tourists. There was no audience. There was no income in it. There was no benefit to the fiction if it was a fiction. There was just a man alone on an island, hanging broken dolls in the dark, because something had frightened him deeply enough that he could not stop. The Guinness World Records organization, which later awarded the island its record for the largest collection of claimed haunted dolls in the world, put it plainly: whether or not the dolls are actually haunted is impossible to prove. What is not impossible to prove is that one man believed completely for the whole of the second half of his life that they were necessary. And he acted on that belief every single day. The visitors who come to the island now report things that are harder to dismiss than you might expect. Multiple independent accounts from people who arrived at different times and did not know each other describe the same experiences. The feeling of being watched the moment they step off the boat. The sense that the doll's hollow eyes are tracking them as they move. Some say they have seen the heads of the dolls turn slightly, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to keep facing them as they walk past. Others report hearing whispering, not from the other visitors, not from the trees, from the dolls themselves. Paranormal investigators who have visited the island with recording equipment have documented what they describe as unusually high electromagnetic readings, particularly in the area around the original cabin where Julian slept. Cold spots on an island surrounded by a warm tropical canal system. Batteries draining inexplicably in equipment that was fully charged on the boat. Photographs developing or loading onto screens with light anomalies that the photographers say were not visible to the naked eye at the time. There are also those who say the island acts on them after they leave. People who have taken things from the island, even small things, even by accident, report nightmares. A persistent sense of something following them home. A feeling that they left something unfinished back on that Chinampa. The current caretaker of the island, Rogelio Sanchez Santana, Julian's great-nephew, has said in interviews that he sees and hears things on the island that he cannot explain. He has lived with this. He has accepted it. And when he is asked what will happen to the island after he is gone, his answer is this. The ownership, he says, he leaves to the dead. In 2001, Julián Santana Barrera was 80 years old. He had been living on that island for roughly 50 years. He had not stopped collecting dolls. He had not stopped hearing things at night. He had not, in all that time, found the peace he was looking for. His nephew, Anastasio Velasco, came to the island that year to help his uncle. The two of them spent the day working together. They planted pumpkins on the island's small plot of farmable land. They fished in the canal. It was a normal day, as days on that island went. And then something shifted in Julian. His nephew later described what happened in the final hour. Julian had grown quiet. Then he had grown animated. He was staring into the canal water, and he began to sing. He sang with genuine joy, Anastasio said. He told his nephew that that the mermaids in the water were calling for him, that they were coming. Anastasio stepped away from the bank. He was gone for only a brief time. When he came back, Julián Santana Barrera was face down in the canal, lifeless, still. The cause of death has been given as either drowning or a heart attack, depending on the account. The medical distinction matters less than the geographical one. Because Julian's body was found in the exact same spot where, 50 years before, he had pulled a dead girl from that water. Not in that general stretch of canal, not in that approximate area, the same spot. His last words had been about voices coming from the water, and he died in the water where she had died. After Julian's death, his family opened the island to the public. Anastasio took over as caretaker. The island, which had already been drawing visitors during Julian's lifetime, became something else entirely after his death. A place where people came not just out of curiosity, but out of something closer to pilgrimage. They brought dolls with them. They left offerings at the base of the trees, food, flowers, small trinkets, the way you leave something at a grave. Boat tours in Mexico City began advertising the island of the dolls as a destination. Today, you approach it the same way you always have, by tragenera. Pulled through the canal by hand, past the egrets and kingfishers and pelicans that nest in the reeds, past the water snakes moving silently through the lilies, past the other chinampas where people are still living and farming the same way the Aztecs did, on the same waterways the Aztecs built. And then the island appears on the bank ahead, and the faces appear with it. $4,000 dolls, approximately, though no one has ever been able to count them all precisely, because they do not stay still enough to count. That is what the visitors say. Julian's one-room cabin, two things are displayed that have not moved since he was alive. The first doll he ever hung, and Agustinita, the only doll he ever named. She sits in the cabin and stares at the door. People who have spent time in that cabin say it is the most uncomfortable place on the island. Not because of the dolls themselves, but because of the feeling that Julian is still in there with them. Still watching, still tending, still trying to keep something quiet that refuses to be quiet. Here is what we can say with certainty about La Isla de las Muñecas. A man named Don Julián Santana Barrera moved to a remote chinampa in the canal system of Xochimilco in the 1950s. He lived alone there for roughly 50 years. He spent those 50 years collecting broken, discarded, waterlogged dolls and hanging them from every tree, fence, and wall on the island. He did this because of a girl who drowned. He died in the water where she drowned, in the same spot. After telling his nephew that voices in the water were calling for him, his family still tend the island. They still hear things at night. And the island is still covered in dolls. Every one of them staring outward. Every one of them watching the canal, waiting for something, or watching for it. The question that stays with every single person who visits that place is not whether the girl was real. The question is what Julian heard in the dark for 50 years that he never once found a way to silence. And whether at the end it finally answered him. Whatever you believe about what happened on that island, one thing is not in dispute. There are places in the world where the weight of a single human life leaves a mark so deep that the place itself seems to carry it forward. Long after the person is gone. Long after the water closes over the spot where they fell. Julián Santana Barrera gave 50 years of his life to a girl nobody else could prove existed. He died where she died. He is buried now, but the dolls are still hanging. And at night, when the last boat has gone back down the canal and the water goes still and the egrets stop moving in the reeds, the island is alone again. The way Julián was alone, watching the dark water, listening. If tonight's investigation into the stories that history quietly sets aside is something that you want more of, leave a like on this video and subscribe to Hushed History. There are more of these waiting. And some of them are far harder to walk away from than this one.